So here in question 7, as we're getting a little bit more advanced in these grade exams, we now start to work with real life music. I think up to this point we've mostly been looking at just little extracts, little examples, or maybe even artificially composed things that are easy to work with. Whereas as we get a little bit more advanced, the exams start to ask us to look at real music that has been written by real composers and answer questions about how that music is working. And so here we've got an extract from Saint-Saëns, who's a French composer, wrote lots of music for the organ and for orchestra and for chamber instruments as well. And this is an example of a chamber piece for cello and piano. And so we'll need to look through this music and just see what is going on in terms of the musical language and in terms of the dynamics and maybe in terms of the style of the music. And there'll be lots of questions asking us about what's going on here. So having a look through, it does look like quite an interesting piece. There's obviously some interesting rhythms going on here in the piano part at the start, and then those interesting rhythms kind of get passed on to the cello. There's obviously some imitation going on here where the piano is playing something for a moment and then the cello picks up that idea and runs with it. And we see there's obviously something building up, I think, as we go through this extract. It's only a few bars. I mean, it's only 10 bars or so, but you can see here certainly, I think, something interesting. This will sound quite dramatic, I think, and we've got a crescendo going through here and there's lots more notes going on. So I think in a way this looks like quite an important note in the music. I would say the music is leading up to that. That might be a climactic moment in the piece when the cello reaches that quite high note in its register, that top F. So, there's lots of interesting things here, and we'll, I'm sure, be asked about lots of those as we look at the questions. So, question A says, give the meaning of molto tranquillo, and that's what we get right here at the start of the piece. And this is a performance indication. It's telling us kind of how the music should sound. And with lots of these performance markings, you just kind of have to have seen them before or have looked them up to get a good idea as to what they mean. There isn't a trick often. If you speak Italian, it's obviously going to help, but sometimes French composers wrote instructions in their music in French and German composers wrote instructions in their music in German. So it's just as you become more experienced as a musician, you will have seen more and more of these indications and you'll just know what they mean. And so this one just means, so molto in Italian means either very or much. So in this case, I think we'll go with very. And then tranquillo just means calm. So calm is just a sort of character that this music should have, and you can imagine that the texture of the music is going to be quite calm, particularly at the beginning. The music is quiet, there's not much going on. The cello particularly has these long held notes, which I think would help give an atmosphere of calm music. Okay, the next bit is saying, what does this thing mean, this kind of triangle type symbol? And we can see an example of one here in bar 3. So all the way through this bar we've got this sort of opening pair of lines, and of course these are a crescendo hairpin. So that's telling us throughout this bar both the cello and the piano together should build their dynamic level and should get a bit louder. And so that's all that means. So that just means get louder. So that's fine. The next one we see quite a lot, particularly in piano music, actually, this squiggly line, and normally next to a chord. What that's telling us is that we should not just put all the notes of the chord down on the piano at the same time. Instead, it's asking us to kind of ripple through them, rather like a harp, could do, coming through the chord, and that gives another sort of interesting performance effect that we can do. So this is asking for the chord to be played as an arpeggio. An arpeggio actually comes from Italian and it just means like a harp. Harps are really great at playing beautiful kind of broken chords in that way, and so when we try and imitate that sound on the piano or on another instrument, we call that arpeggio. And finally it's asking us for the meaning of MF, which we see, where do we see MF? Here we go, at the end. MF is here, and this is just a dynamic marking. It's just telling us we've had this crescendo, so we've had a building of the dynamic level, and then the music goes down again in level, and then as we build through here, as I said, I think this is probably quite an important moment in the piece, both because the cello has got to a very high note, but also because the composer has told us this music should be a bit louder at this point, and it should obviously be maybe just stronger and more forceful than it has been up to that point. So I would say that's quite an important moment, and The MF dynamic means that we are to play mezzo forte. Which means moderately loud. The next part, part 2, says give the name of the tonic triad highlighted in bar 5. So let's go and have a look at bar 5. Here we go. Obviously, some of the, this sort of box doesn't normally appear in music, so someone's come in and drawn that to point out this particular chord to us and ask us what chord is it, and they've told us it's the tonic chord of the music, and that's a really important clue because that tells us lots of information about what this chord is and what it might mean. Even just by looking at it, we can see there's an F, an A C, and an F in there, and when we add those notes together, we do get a chord of F major. One way we could check that we've got this right and we haven't made a mistake anywhere is just to look at the key signature for this piece, and the key signature for F major is 1 flat. So all of those clues are pointing us in the direction that the tonic triad for this piece and the key of this piece and the scale of this piece is F major. So that is dead easy. The next part of this question asks answer true or untrue to the following statements. And so it's not saying true or false, we have to answer true or untrue. I'm sure you wouldn't be marked wrong for writing false, but you might as well get it exactly right. So the first statement is the cello's highest note is a G. So let's go and have a look for the cello's highest note. Well, that's definitely a high note. We've noticed that that's quite an important high note. So the question would be, is there any note higher than this one in the music? And as I'm looking through, I don't see one. Something that can often catch you out is when the music changes from one clef to another, and so a note that doesn't look very high on the lines and spaces actually is quite a lot higher. This is looking like the contender as being the highest note in the extract, and that is not a G, that is an F. So if that is the highest note, let's disagree with this and say the cello's highest note is not a G, so that is untrue, otherwise known as false. Okay, the next question is saying, is it true or false, or true or untrue, that the rhythmic device known as syncopation features in bar 1 to 5? So what does syncopation mean? Well, syncopation means putting notes in between the beats and playing around with where the beats are in the music and all of that kind of thing. And I think if we look at the piano part, particularly in the first few bars, we have all these notes that are tied across the division between beats. So if we think about the first beat ends here, the second beat ends here. You'll see there's lots of notes that are tied across those beat divisions. So they're not really, these notes are not really paying much attention to where the beats naturally fall in the music, and we'll see as the music progresses and the cello picks up that idea, the same thing is true here, and that the cello is again playing across the top or over the top of the beats. I would say that there's definitely something to be said for this music using syncopation as one of its rhythmic features, and so I'm going to say true to that one. Okay, so the final one is asking us the shortest note value in this extract is a semiquaver or a 16th note. Now that is quite easy to disprove as soon as we look at this final, well, second to last bar in the extract, because these notes have 3 bars going across the top, and that indicates that they are demi-semiquavers or 30-second notes. So these are definitely not semiquavers, and they are much shorter than semiquavers, so we're going to say that this is untrue and that there are shorter notes than semiquavers in this extract. Okay, that's part B taken care of. Let's look at the next bit. It says rewrite bar 6 of the cello part in the tenor clef so that it sounds at the same pitch. Remember to write in the clef sign. So tenor clef does come up sometimes for cello, particularly when it needs to go higher up in its register. It moves away from the bass clef and uses the tenor clef, and so this is where knowing about some different clefs is going to come in handy. The first thing we need to do, of course, is just draw in the tenor clef, and the tenor clef looks a bit like the alto clef. It looks exactly like the alto clef, except that it focuses the middle of the clef on a different line. So the whole purpose of this clef, it's called the C clef, And what it does is it just tells us where middle C is. So in this clef, the tenor clef is telling us that the middle of the clef lines up with this fourth line up, and it's the fourth line up, this one, that is middle C. And then we can use that information to help us work out where we need to put everything else in the music. Probably the first thing we should do, if we're being really sort of accurate and detailed, is to add in the key signature. So we're working with bar 6, so this is bar 6 here, and it's only got 4 notes in, which is good, but we do need to add in, let's add in a key signature. So we need to add in a B flat, and on this particular clef, because this is C, this fourth line up, B flat is going to be putting, is going to be putting a flat sign just there underneath the fourth line in the third space up on the clef, because as again the fourth line is C, so the note underneath it is going to be B flat. That's relatively straightforward. Then we just need to copy in these notes. So we want a B flat to an A and a D to a C, and the rhythm is a quaver to a dotted crotchet each time. So it's going to be B flat to an A, it's a quaver to a dotted crotchet, and then a D to a C. So that's a D and that's a C in this tenor clef. Okay, and then just to be really accurate, let's just copy in the markings as well. So we have accents on the quavers, and those are also slurred into the dotted crotchets. And we'll put a bar line there. And then I think that is a pretty good writing out of bar 6 in the tenor clef. So that's great, that's the next part done. Question C is saying, which type of scale is formed by the first 7 notes of the cello part? So let's have a look, let's go and see. Probably nice to just write these out. We've worked out the key of this piece is F major, so we might expect F major as a possible candidate here. So it starts on an F, then goes to a G, then we have an A. Oh, but then something interesting happens. We have a B natural. So, my initial thought of F major, probably not, because we've got a B natural in our scale, which is not something you'll normally find in F major. Then we go to C sharp, so we see lots of sharps now, lots of accidentals. So this is not probably a standard major or minor scale. There is something else going on here, and this is an E sharp, and of course an E sharp is really F if we're thinking clearly about these things. There's not much of a difference, but in the music they've decided to write an E sharp for some reason. Maybe that helps us work out what scale we've got here, because if that's an F, really this scale only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps, and normally a major or minor scale would have 7 steps. So it's making me think that this is some kind of less common, more unusual scale that we're dealing with here. And if we look at the distances in terms of tones and semitones between these different pitches, that will probably give it away, because the distance between F and G is a tone, and the distance between G and A is also a tone, and the distance between A and B flat is also a tone, and the distance between A and B natural is a tone. B natural and C sharp is also a tone. C sharp and D sharp is also a tone. D sharp and F is also a tone. So we have a scale here that is wholly tones, and one of those scales, what do we call those scales? Well, that's obviously a whole tone scale, and because this is a piece by Saint-Saëns, who's kind of writing at a time in France where whole tone scales were starting to become quite common and popular in music, I think whole tone scale is a really good guess for this question. And so for part C, we're going to say this scale is a whole tone scale. So just because the key signature says that the music is in F major, it doesn't mean that the composer has to write every single note coming from the scale of F major, and in this case they chose to write some different notes that gives this different whole tone scale type sound. Okay, part 2 says give the technical name tonic dominant for the cello's second note in bar 6. Let's go and find that note. Bar 6 is this one. So we're asking the question, well, what is this What is this note? The second note of bar 6. Well, it's an A, so that's the first thing we can say. And we know that the key of the music is F major. So if we were to count up from F, F, G, A means that A is the third step of the scale of F major, which makes me think that the answer to this question, the cello's second note in bar 6, is the mediant, so the third step of the scale. Is the mediant. And finally, I think for this question, part 3 says the cello is a non-transposing orchestral string instrument. Name a non-transposing orchestral woodwind instrument. Okay, so I'd say as long as we steer clear of clarinets and maybe cor anglais, we should be fine naming any woodwind instrument, because there aren't that many transposing woodwind instruments. So the piccolo would be fine, the flute would be fine, the oboe would be fine, the bassoon would be fine. I'm just going to go with flute to finish this question off. And that, I think, brings us to the end of question 7. So I will see you in the next one for question 8.